Since 1998, when There's Something About Mary was released, which was followed closely by American Pie in 1999, low-brow, over-the-top, gross-out humor have become the staple fare of popular comedy films today. Discounting 4 of the top-grossing comedies in the last 10 years that were cartoons, 4 out of the 7 live-action comedies were rated R. This reveals the increasing popularity of R-rated comedies. Moreover, The Hangover, one of the most over-the-top comedies produced to date, holds the position as the highest-grossing R-rated comedy of all time. Additionally, The Hangover sits in 3rd place among R-rated movies of all genres, with The Hangover 2, Beverly Hills Cop, and Wedding Crashers in 4th, 5th, and 8th place, a real testament to the marketability of R-rated comedies. R stands for restricted, but I think raunchy, rude, and often repulsive are more accurate descriptions for these movies. Though they are very funny, I believe that Durham is correct when she posits that the messages youth are being bombarded with regarding sex and sexuality are more harmful than helpful. An examination of R-rated comedies exemplifies how uncontested sexism, homophobia, and transphobia are. Phenomenon of sexualization, as noted by the American Psychological Association, proliferates these films, wherein a person's value comes only from his or her sexual appeal, physical attractiveness defines how sexy one is, sexual objectification makes individuals into things for others' sexual use, and sexuality is inappropriately imposed upon a person. I argue that all these factors taken together reveal messages that are no laughing matter. Not only do R-rated comedies stay silent about the consequences of too much drinking, unprotected sex, and early drug use, what these films are doing is perpetuating misogynistic beliefs while normalizing rape culture. Rape culture is a complex of beliefs perpetuated by sexist, homophobic, and heterosexist attitudes and practices that ignore, normalize, condone, excuse, or encourage rape and male sexual aggression, thusly creating a continuum of threat and violence that ranges from sexual remarks to sexual touching to rape itself. By making light of situations that are not so pleasant or funny when experienced in real life, and making allowances for the domination of women by men, especially in situations where sex is involved, the underlying notions that inform the humor in R-rated comedies demonstrate one of the ways in which rape culture is upheld in our society. Rape culture is the sexualization of girls and women. Usually girls and women do not figure prominently in these films, except as highly sexualized objects, lusted after and to be conquered by men. These comedies, then, are a perfect example of the male gaze, detailed by Gigi Durham in her book, The Lolita Effect. The ideal spectator is always assumed to be male, and the image of the woman is designed to flatter him. Notice how often women are scantily clad, but men are allowed to remain fully clothed, or when the camera's focus is solely on parts of women's bodies. These blatantly demeaning and degrading images of women, as Jackson Katz points out, are examples of objectification inspired by the male gaze. Observe how women in these films must act as if they enjoy being hypersexualized. What's more, women of color, and those who do not look like the ideal sexualized woman, rarely appear in these films. If they ever briefly surface, they are portrayed as completely undesirable and are there to be laughed at. Rape culture is women's bodies only having as much value as given to them by men. As Durham points out, girls are taught from a young age that boys are the arbiters of girls' sexuality, and that male desires and preferences are of paramount importance. Perfectly illustrating that men's pleasure is the only thing that matters is this scene from the recently released movie Bad Teacher. It's supposed to be hilarious because Justin Timberlake's character wants to dry hump instead of have sex. What's disconcerting about this scene is that Cameron Diaz's character, the woman, has to do what the man wants and receives no pleasure for herself in return. He also orders her to stop talking, not once, but twice. In Bridesmaids, heralded by some as a game-changer for women in R-rated comedies because it features an all-woman cast, we see the main character played by Kristen Wiig, similarly catering to the man's desires, after which he says,
"I really want you to leave, but I don't know how to say it without sounding like a dick."
These commonplace scenarios imply that girls have no sexual desires of their own, and that if they do, they better suppress them and put the man's pleasure first. A woman's self-worth is garnered through male validation, which can only be achieved by ascribing to the limited role as subservient object of male desire. Susan Lin sums it up perfectly when she states that children and youth are learning to posture sexuality that has nothing to do with relationships and everything to do with sex as object, sex as power, and sex to sell. Rape culture is treating heterosexuality as the norm. Girls and boys learn that the only admissible form of sexual orientation is to be straight, which is reinforced by the fact that all the leading characters in these films are straight. Homophobic and transphobic comments are irrefutably expressed.
So long, gay boys! Paging Dr. Faggot!
Sexual practices also have to adhere to heterosexual standards, where sexual enjoyment from non-conventional practices are presented as disgusting and comical. Most of the time, the sexual acts marked deviant are ones that threaten ideas of the dominant male. Even when lesbianism is portrayed, it is only for the gratification of men, because, as Dorkin asserts, society would have us know that women are incapable of achieving whole and satisfying sexual union without the intrusion and participation of a male figure. Consequently, women kissing or touching become only a performance for male validation. These depictions ultimately entrench and reinforce heteronormativity while restricting sexual experimentation and the chance for girls and boys to discover what personal sexual practices one prefers. Rape culture is also treating diminished capacity to consent as the natural path to sexual activity.
Well, she's gonna be at the party, and she's gonna be drunk, and she likes me at least a little, enough to get with me.
Josh, you're in college. The window of opportunity to drink and take advantage of young girls is getting smaller by the day.
In these R-rated comedies, having a good time is always about getting drunk and getting as much action as possible. Boys are taught that intoxicated girls are perfectly acceptable targets, even the most desirable ones, to extract sexual favors from, thus normalizing taking advantage of girls and women.
Believe it or not, in every man there's a code written that says, tackle.
Rape culture is not identifying sexual harassment for what it is. Jenny in Eurotrip has to constantly fend off unwarranted sexual remarks, illustrating how unwanted sexual advances are allowed to go on unquestioned both in movies and in real life. Andrea Dorkin corroborates the situation, which is the daily life of women, when she observes that women are constantly harassed, often threatened with violence, often violated. Rape culture negates that men can also be the victims of sexual harassment, promoting the idea that any sexual experience must be positive for men, when that isn't always the case. Moreover, women as sexual predators are portrayed as naughty and desirable, completely discounting the emotional repercussions of men who have been victimized. Along with sexual harassment, non-physical sexual assaults like peeping tomming and stalking are treated as if totally unrelated to brutal and physical sexual assault. What's more, the onus in rape culture dictates that the victimized is responsible for staving off the perpetrator while continually having to just grin and bear it.
The funny thing about my back is that it's located on my cock.
Rape culture also encourages men to use the language of rape to establish dominance over one another, and presents violence against women, such as the branding of a prostitute, as funny instead of distressing. By normalizing rampant sexism through objectifying, debasing, disrespecting, and devaluing women, R-rated comedies that are imbued with misogynistic notions allow for rape culture to flourish. When we look at the real-life consequences of rape culture, we must ask ourselves, are these things really a laughing matter?